Mr. Gommaar D'Hulst, welcome to the Brute Training Podcast, my friend. How are you?
Good, George. Thank you. Thank you for having me. All good here.
No worries at all. I'm a big fan of your work, and I think most of our listeners will know you from your YouTube channel, WOD Science. That's sort of been blowing up in the space for the last year or so.
Yeah, it's always interesting to know that and to hear that. Like you're sitting in front of the camera, you make these videos, and then it's hard to know. Obviously, you see the numbers, how many people watch this, but yeah, you still don't really know exactly how many and how you approach people. So it's cool that people reach out. It's like, hey, I like your videos. I mean, that's what we do it for. So yeah, that's nice to hear.
Beautiful. Now, I am super interested because you're a PhD scientist with in sporting background, and I'm very keen to hear about what got you as a young man wanting to do this for work.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been a researcher all my life. I'm still a researcher, actually. I'm still 50% working at the university here in Zurich, in ETH Zurich. So yeah, let's maybe start way back when I did my studies. I was doing exercise sciences, having a lot of sports, having a lot of different, let's say, courses. And then there's one professor that started lecturing that was about exercise physiology. His name is Peter Hespel. Yeah, he was just super captivating. He was talking about a lot of endurance sports because in Belgium, like you have two big sports, which is football, soccer, and cycling, right? So he was a big cycling fan. He was also very applied. He was talking to and was an advisor of many big cycling teams. So he could explain things really well, and I immediately understood everything he said. Like compared to other courses, that's not always the case, like chemistry or physics. But that was like, okay, that's something I want to do later in life. And then I started a PhD actually at his lab together with another assistant professor. Then, like looking into the effects of high altitude and how high altitude affects muscle mass. That was my interest, muscle mass physiology, biochemistry, and we really went deep into different, yeah, like the effects of low oxygen environments, which is also related to exercise, by the way, and loss and also gain of muscle mass. So that was my, let's say, my academic journey. That was my PhD. I did that for 5.5 years approximately, and then I got the opportunity to jump into to start together with my professor now, which is my PI still, a laboratory of exercise and health. So again, everything with exercise, related to exercise, in Zurich, at ETH Zurich, one of the bigger universities in Europe, in the world. So that was a great opportunity. And yeah, since then I'm still always interested in science behind like the deep knowledge on muscle biology, muscle physiology, but also applying that. Maybe we can get to that towards, yeah, like new sports, hybrid sports, CrossFit, high rocks. Because I mean, there's not that much science in those sports, and it's actually very interesting because you are combining everything together, all the knowledge that we have from endurance world, which is actually quite a lot of knowledge, and also from the strength world, which obviously blew up a lot with all the bodybuilders and all the big accounts there, and also there's a lot of science there. But how can you combine that into something like a CrossFit workout? That was always intriguing to me, and I don't think we have all the answers at this time. So that's why, I'm starting this journey, and I'm interested in it. It's all about interest, I think, in life. That's important.
100%. That's the most important part.
Yeah, yeah,
I think it's actually, I think we all forget how big of a gap there is between those more traditional sports, like you said, cycling, running, things like that, and even football, I suppose, that have got all this science stuff behind them and all this data. And then you take something like CrossFit and High Rocks, where I suppose we think we know a lot, but I suppose we're only just scratching the surface of what we truly know from it, like a true scientific perspective.
yeah. I can only agree. I mean, we all, or maybe some of your listeners, because you're an OG platform, and you have been long in the CrossFit space. There was kind of this anti-science from Glassman in the beginning. So I do think it kind of held back some researchers to look into CrossFit specifically. Although this is now improving, but still, let's say you want to do a big study on CrossFit specifically, or high intensity functional fitness, let's call it like that. It's still not that straightforward because obviously, if you want to do a big training study, like you want to look deep into certain parts, let's say of physiology, you need funding, you need grants, right? And what we see now, I mean, when I read most of the studies that are coming out related to CrossFit, let's say, or functional fitness, most of them are pretty low budget. They're observational studies. They're mostly master projects. You see it, like they're not big studies like, for example, the Norwegians do, or with new methods of assessing physiology that do cost a lot of money. So yeah, that's I think a large part why the gap is there. It's just not that easy to get funding related to these sports, right? It's not an Olympic sport. Probably governmental organizations don't care too much about this stuff. Although I do think it's still interesting from like a scientific point of view, and that's why yeah, there is good research, but it's certainly not up to the same standards as some of the research I see in, let's say, endurance sports like marathon or something. Yeah.
And like with the speaking about how Glassman was almost anti-science, do you think it's a case of truly being anti-science, or do you think it's more so a case of the science hasn't caught up or the testing methods hasn't caught up? Because I suppose everything has to be something, doesn't it? It's not like it's magical fairy dust. So the results have to lie in something, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I know there were some problems with the fact that I think, like Glassman, obviously I cannot speak in his name, but I know he was not amused by the fact that there were kind of directing certain results related to injuries in CrossFit. And I do think he was kind of right there, because if we do see, look, that's one of the maybe the areas that has been researched quite a lot in CrossFit. And the injuries, right, are not that high in CrossFit compared to, for example, running sports or even contact sports or football. They're actually lower, which is interesting in my opinion. And also from anecdotal perspective, from my own, I've never gotten injured. I don't see that many people getting injured. Of course, there are because of the movements, and we can talk about that. So I do understand that at that point it was like, okay, guys, come on, like, what is this? You're kind of not fully reporting all the data. That could be potentially something. Yeah, and then in combination, I think with the fact that there's just not that much money related to functional sports. Certainly in the beginning, it might actually change with Hyrox. We can talk about that. Because yeah, maybe they do have a bit more funding, and maybe they want to push this whole area a bit further. So yeah, that's I think that's how it is. There's always something, and it is true. You see it also, I think, even in strength sports, that the scientists are slower. I do agree with this. Like sometimes you have athletes who are doing things that are making a lot of sense, and then 2, 3, 4 years later, we find some money to actually investigate this, and then it's like, okay, this was kind of correct. Sometimes it's also the other way around, but in most cases it is a very slow process. It's way too slow. It's one of my frustrations in science, for sure, that it is a slow process. We can sometimes be a bit more efficient, and that's how, yeah, you see lower quality, I think, research into high intensity functional fitness on the most part, not everything, of course.
And do you think so with the more traditional ones, such as let's use cycling as an example,
Yeah,
do you
yeah.
think that with the technology we have now, we pretty much know as much as we're going to know about the sport and the best ways to train for it? Or do you still think, even with those, that there are gains to be made?
um yeah, so one of the things that highly interests me is in functional sports. Like, let's start maybe with traditional sports. In traditional sports, it's very measurable. Like, meaning, if you put an power meter on Tadej Pogacar, the best cyclist in the world probably has ever seen. You put it on his bike, you let him ride 40-minute uphill time trial. You know exactly how much power he has put out. You know his physiology. You can measure whatever, even oxygen uptake. You can measure so many things to understand, okay, that's the top end power. That's, as an athlete, where I want to strive for if I want to win the Tour de France, for example. You kind of, as a coach, know really well what to do. It's not exact science, but it's quite close. I think it's the same with, for example, football. You know now, with GPS very well how many sprints athletes do, which position is related to how many sprints, how strength endurance, speed endurance, agility. You know a lot of things. With CrossFit, specifically functional movements, it's really a black box, I would say. I mean, you know better than me as a coach. Um, You can have athletes who are doing a certain workout, they crush it, and then they do another workout, maybe hitting more the posterior chain, whatever, doing more powerful movements, and they're way down the leaderboard. Why is this? Like, you can kind of guess, but there's not that much known. So that's, I think, very interesting to understand more the biomechanics and the physiology of, or let's say, the impact of functional movement, specifically in CrossFit or even High Rocks. And that is where we can learn a lot still. And as you just said, we can improve our, let's say, training schedules, training programs relate to that data, for sure. Maybe as a last part relate to that, because what I think is very difficult in designing training plans, you can maybe comment on that, is to know the impact of your workout or if of your session on the body, right? For example, if I do Fran, I am done for 48 hours. Like, it's maybe 4 minutes, but I know it's very hard for me. If I do
Yes.
something longer, it's way more power output for, or let's say load on the body, but actually I can come back the next day and do something, whatever, squats and so on. So the intensity and the power within a certain time frame really affects how your body has to recover, and that's something I think that some programs mismanaged a bit, because yeah, the high intensity nature of the sport is very important, and together with all the eccentric contractions, it does have a large effect, in my opinion. And we really don't know well how to monitor training load in functional sports. Like,
Mm.
there's no papers about it. I have some thoughts. I've put it also on YouTube, but it's still not perfect science, in my opinion. So, but very important, because you see a lot of people getting overtrained and all that stuff. We know that.
Do you think, with the resource comment, if someone was had unlimited resources and was an elite CrossFit athlete, do you think there is enough data, at least, that they would then be able to create a team, say like an elite cyclist would have, that would be able to uh, monitor these certain markers which you're talking about, and I suppose nail down what their recovery time frame would be, like the actual physiological effect of a piece, or a whole day's worth of workouts on the body is? Or do you still think, even without unlimited money, we still just don't know enough?
I would lean towards a second, to be honest with you. I would lean towards a second, although, I mean, maybe you've heard me talking about. I am involved as an advisor in a small startup. It's called WOD Motions. It's a collaboration with a good colleague of mine, biomechanics Mariah Sabioni, and she's actually trying to look into exactly what we're talking about. So she is trying to monitor functional movements. So she has a wearable that you can put on the wrist as well as on the chest. You've probably heard about this, and we can assess movement efficiency. We can assess pacing, very important, how many seconds you take per rep, all automatically. And this we then transfer towards external load. So for example, right, like how you could approach this. You have a cyclist, and like every training session he does or she does, you put a wattage, like a power meter, on his bike or her bike, and so you measure the exact external load that he or she does, according, like, for a month. And that would, yeah, relate really well to, let's say, the training load. Not exactly, because it also depends on the intensity, but still, it would relate really well to the exact load, not only duration, but the load on the body. And this is something, like, if you would have unlimited resources, that you could also start doing in CrossFit Athlete, and it could make sense, in my opinion, because then we can know, okay, what is the impact of that workout. It can be very short, but the athlete was producing enormous amounts of power. We can actually measure this, and he was, for example, moving very inefficiently. We can also measure that. So then you can at least, with some expertise, not exact science, you need some art there as well, to understand, okay, maybe we should back off here, maybe we can push that zone 2 session a bit longer because it should be recovered. And this goes way further than the metrics, for example, that you see in smartwatches of Garmin and Whoop. This is really like data from CrossFit, specific movements, and that is something where we're working towards. But it's very difficult, and it's not that straightforward to do, obviously, right? Like, you have a lot of movements, you have a lot of workouts, and yeah, measuring whatever wall walks,
There's
or
lots of
that's maybe
variables.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, lots
there's
of
lots of
variables.
variables.
That's the hard part about CrossFit, and also Hyrox to a lesser extent. It's the yeah, you know that better, the varied approach of the sport, and that's why some people have been running into a wall. I think that's why it's a pro for most people, like for example me. If I train only 4 times per week, because the movements are so varied, I never get injured, and I actually don't get really that tired as well. But if you are like an elite athlete, you obviously have also the physiological impact for sure.
I think most professional CrossFit athletes definitely will almost never find their minimal effective dose or want to be near their minimal effective dose. Um,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
because the sport has been geared for so long around volume, and although that, I suppose, trend is changing, I still think where the truth and the science may eventually get to might show that the ideal requirements are quite a lot less than what is like common practice at the moment.
Yeah. Certainly in terms of intensity, in my opinion. Um, it has been shown, like also from endurance training. I mean, let's say the upper limit of training for let's say a triathlon, a full distance triathlon, is more related to how much the person can take in energy, so literally eat, than to training load. Meaning that the more the person can eat, let's say 5, 6, 7,000 calories, that will be very much correlated to how much load you can give him or her as a coach. In CrossFit, it's a little bit different because yeah, you cannot always do zone 2. You won't be a good training like a good athlete then, right? You will become a good endurance athlete, but not a good CrossFit athlete. So you need to
Yeah.
go at least sometimes really hard, like full out, really hard workouts, and that is just inevitable. You need a lot of recovery for that. There's no way around this. And maybe if you don't do that recovery well enough, or at least long enough, you will run into a wall, and that's what you see typically in athletes. It's not related to the sport; it's related to how much recovery you allow your body, and it's not easy to know. I mean, it depends on the person. You know that better than me.
100%. It's like, and like we said, there's so many variables that play into it and tie into it, and trying to take so many things, obviously from the strength background, from the endurance background, and then you're mixing those in, and even something the effect of a true 5x5 back squat session has on your nervous system and total energy. Like, I don't know how you truly measure that in comparison to measuring us like a zone 2 piece, which is probably one of the easiest things to measure because it's similar to, or there's a lot of comparatives with cycling and running. And I feel like you can have a good data set on that. But I feel like the strength stuff and the effect that then that has on other stuff, we are very, very in the dark about still.
Yeah. Yeah, what one approach that you can do as maybe as a novice coach, or as a novice athlete is, um, if you do those heavy strength sessions, just make sure that that is the focus of the session. Maybe only do that. Maybe do some accessory work, maybe some upper body work, but don't do 5 rounds of 10 thrusters and 20 pull-ups after that, right? Like, that's maybe a good idea to maybe we don't exactly know what the effect of strength is, but if you do the 5x5 well, and you actually go close to failure in squats, yeah, you need a lot of rest, like for sure. And maybe it's better to come back 6 hours later, or even the next day, to do your metcon than doing it right after. Um, Back in the day when I was doing a lot of classes, this was some of my frustrations a lot. Like, I'm pretty, let's say I'm an explosive rather person. I'm quite strong just naturally. So when
Fast
I
twitch
when it was
athlete.
back squats, that was super hard for me. Like, I couldn't do a workout, or I could, but I really had to sandbag the workout. I was like,
Yes.
what am I actually doing here? While other people, actually, maybe that's also interesting for coaches. When you are maybe not the strongest athlete in the room, and you just want to get fitter, it actually could be a good idea to do your workout after the back squats, because for you, it's not that high of a load. You can, like, your body and joints can tolerate that. And when you design the workout well, you can maybe do a workout afterwards. It's fine, but depends on the athlete, really, I think.
Do you think that lends itself to the more how long have you been doing CrossFit for? Like as
Long,
part of your fitness regime?
long, like I started in the first CrossFit gym, or the third CrossFit gym in or box in Belgium. Yeah, like 14 years. So yeah, 14
So
years.
you would have seen at the time where the trend was throughout the week, you would have a day that is only lifting, or you might do an Olympic lift, and then the next day you might have a Metcon, and every day sort of had its own theme. Whereas I feel like now the trend is more towards, and I suppose it's led by people wanting to feel like they've done more in a class where they'll have a strength or skill piece and then a metcon or intervals or something conditioning afterwards every day. Do you think that what we were doing originally is probably more ideal than what is happening now?
Yeah, I mean, so we have run a study almost exactly related to that, like an online study where we had people training kind of what you said. So we let them do two strength pieces in one day. That's it, 60-minute session, compound movements, and then the next day we let them do skill and two metcons usually. Right, so that's alternating day, hybrid training, so to speak. And then the other group did exactly the same training. That's important, exactly the same training, but they put it together. So they did one strength part in one day and then the Metcon. And then the next day they did also another Metcon and another strength part, right? And we did see, in general, certainly on, let's say, CrossFit specific workouts, like very like Metcon, AMRAPs, and so on, we did see a larger improvement with the alternated day approach. We
Okay.
did actually two
Yep.
studies, and we, in general, like not across the board, but in general, in most tests we did, before and after an 8-week training period, we did see a larger improvement. Actually, if some people are interested, maybe we can put that video into the show notes. I have a video about this where I
Yeah.
explain this very deeply. And
Yeah, for sure.
um, so yeah, that's like a hybrid approach, and so that would say yes, I agree with you. Although some people I know also spoke a lot to CrossFit gym owners, and they say, yeah, we cannot really do that. People wouldn't like it. So what I would suggest for those people is
Sorry, I just lost you
at
there.
least have a very clear focus of your session, meaning that let's say your focus is strength. You do back squats, you do some accessory that takes maybe 40-45 minutes, and then you do a very short workout, maybe not hitting the lower body, right? Something 5 minutes, whatever, like something short. Or the next day you do a very long metcon, for example, and then a small, whatever, a strength endurance part that you could do for the upper body, whatever. So you can program around it where you have still your focus of the day. So you can just manage your way around it and still have a focus, but not having a blurry session where you do kind of try to do everything, but at the end the person maybe will get fitter, but not in the most efficient way. Yeah, that's something that I sometimes think about, and yeah, there's no right or wrong, but still, focus is important in training. I do think so.
Of course. And when you're doing those tests and measuring, are you measuring the result or like the reps, the times, or is it
Yeah, results.
actually got to do with the blood lactate and stuff like that?
Yeah, so because it's a remote study, we have a lot of people. Like that would be the next step. You get them into the lab, you let them do the workouts in the lab, like every day or whatever, 4 times per week, and then you measure, for example, blood lactate or other parameters related to fitness that are then improved. That's also possible, but that would be like a way bigger study. It's almost a PhD project, and yeah, that's something that I'm definitely interested in. But I do think there's also big positives about doing such a study with our community because you have a lot of different people. You have experienced people as well because people like you are usually experienced watching the YouTube videos, and yeah, just you have more people as well. You have a bigger n number, and it's a very big advantage in those kind of studies. If you do a 10, if you do two groups of 10 people, there's a very unlikely chance to find something related to intervention of certain of an intervention. But if you have 50 people or even 40 people, then statistically it's way more powerful, even though it's remote and they have to do the tests themselves basically.
Because the part I'm super interested in is whether or not or how much the mental aspect of what we were speaking about plays a role. And what I mean by that is, do we think that because you're not pushing yourself in a Metcon every day, and say you're doing it every other day, you actually have a much more better attitude and approach to that Metcon, and it subjectively doesn't feel as bad as opposed to doing the Metcons every day, and it sort of feels like a grind. You're mentally not in as good of a state. Do you think that that could play a role?
Yeah, for sure. But again, it depends a little bit on the focus of the session. I think that too many people always approach Metcons as going like against your friend, all out, highest on the leaderboard, right? Pushing above your threshold, moving like into zone 5, into zone 6. As I said, it's sometimes good, but it might also be good to design, even as a box owner and certainly as a remote coach, to design workouts where you hit certain physiological, let's say, thresholds of the person using functional movements. I do think it's underused in CrossFit. For example, what you can do is you do 5 by 4 minutes with 3 minutes in between of rest, and then you use pretty easy movements that you can keep cycling through, even lightweight. But the goal is to actually hit your VO2 max aerobic intensity, like really not the highest power, but just keep going, no rest, and high breathing and so on. While another workout could be more powerful, could be more sprinty with even more rest, compared to just writing a 12-minute AMRAP of whatever 3 movements. And then why do I say this? Because what is known from the little research we have, and actually I think it's quite interesting, they measured in a specific study, they measured the VO2 max of people on a bike, right? So it's not very specific, but still, and they reached whatever 60 VO2 max, which is a typical like a pretty advanced number. Okay, and then they let those people do Cindy, 20-minute AMRAP of, as we all know, 5 pull-ups, 10 push-ups, and 15 pull-ups, with a mask. So with an oxygen uptake, like they measured oxygen uptake throughout the 20 minutes. And what was interesting to me is that even though their heart rate was really high, the exertion was really high, they were only working up to 63% of their VO2 max, which is very
Okay.
low oxygen
Yeah.
uptake, right? It's you I would have thought, yeah, like 70, 80% for sure, close to their threshold, which is usually the threshold.
Yes.
But because even though they're pretty light movements, although the push-ups are not that light after a while, and even the pull-ups for most people, there is a lot of rest. Like you are actually resting quite a lot, and you are even in a 20-minute AMRAP of Cindy, for most people, not for the elites, but for most people, there is a lot of rest. So if you would equate that, it's not necessarily true that you are working your physiological effects of the training the best. Yes, you are working on your movement efficiency and so on, and also resistant to fatigue. But if you want to improve maybe your VO2 max or your threshold pace or power at threshold, maybe doing everyday Cindy is not the best approach, right? And that's something that could be, yeah, something I think interesting for people to approach this differently. Maybe you do less rounds of Cindy, or you use even easier movements like ring rows to be able to keep the instant power low per movement, but keep cycling, like no rest at all, like you would do a running session or a bike session, but then using functional movements.
So
Scaling down
something
is
being,
sometimes not a bad idea.
yeah, so something that it can be consistently cyclical and basically have
Yes.
almost no transition time,
Yeah.
and you're
Yeah.
always working.
Yeah, yeah, and relate to the mental part. What you said, I didn't really answer your question. What we have, what we had a lot of feedback, obviously, from the athletes who were doing this, and they said that if you would do our approach, which is kind of 2 metcons a day versus 2 strength parts, the 2 strength parts are fine, obviously, right? Like you could do whatever bench press and back squat, but 2 metcons, then people said also, yeah, we kind of paced. We couldn't go all out the first Metcon. Like I, for example, couldn't do it. Because, yeah, we know that there was something else coming up. So if you would do that, you have to program it really well, where you don't always hit the same muscle groups and so on. So people can go hard, or you give them a right intensity. That's also quite useful. That's what we always do. We say, okay, this metcon is pretty light, so you're going to go RPE 7, like how hard it feels out of 7, and then the last one is pretty heavy, so you can go all out, like really really try to push it. So you try to manage the intensity of the workout, basically.
And tying that into something like zone two, is there any stuff that you've studied regarding the timing of zone two and its effectiveness? So, anecdotally, for example, I find that if I do zone two at the end of a training session or at the end of a training day, my output is a lot lower in watts, let's say on the C2 bike, for compared to if I was to do it fresh. So it almost feels as though it is subjectively easier to reach the same target heart rate. Is that backed up by science, or is that going into sort of not being as effective as of a training session?
Yeah, it's a great question. So short answer, I don't know. No one really has looked at this specific question. What we can know is that why this happens to you is likely because your some of your muscle fibers, certainly your type 1 fibers, and even a part of your type 2 fibers will be exhausted from, let's say, a lot of volume and certainly high intensity work of CrossFit. And that's why it feels like your power output will be lower for the same exertion for you, right? Like the actual amount of contractions per time. So that's why it's happening. Do you have the same physiological response? We don't really know. Like, likely yes, right? Likely yes, but we don't really know if this is related to how much training effect you will have from the zone two. So it's hard to say. The timing per se is difficult to say. What is well known, that you need to have some sort of a certain amount of accumulation of that zone two work, right? Like you need to do it for a CrossFitter that is quite muscular, at least 25 minutes, I would say. For an endurance athlete, that's a warm up. For a CrossFitter, I think it's
Of
already
course,
quite
yeah.
good. So that's something that we know. Related to that, we did actually also a very similar study to the one I just explained, relate to zone two, where 3 out of 5 sessions per week were replaced by zone two only on the ergs, right? So one group did 5 workouts, as you just said, like sessions metcon strength, trying to like a good programming relate to that, and the other group did only 2 days of metcon and strength, or strength metcon, and then 3 days of zone 2 training, only that. And what we saw was quite interesting. They improved to the same extent related to fitness related capacity. All right, so it
Okay.
means that
Yeah.
but again, this is in an overall athlete group, not in elite athletes. But it means that you could um, try to, or when you feel a bit tired and you don't want to go super hard, it likely is a good idea to do some zone 2, maybe with some functional movements, to keep adding training load, so you still stimulate the body, but maybe not in a way that is always like super high intensity, high power. At least the little studies that we have done have shown that there's also a good approach, basically. But there's really not that much known about low intensity work in high intensity sports like CrossFit. There's just not that much known. It's really a lot of art now of the coach, and less science, I would say.
And have you noticed any differences regarding the different apparatus used? So, with in CrossFit, say we've got all the different ergs, and I suppose people are doing zone two for what they're thinking is the cardiovascular benefit. But then, if we look at it from like a mitochondrial perspective and the density and all that sort of stuff, do you think that the type of erg that you're choosing to do the zone two on plays a big role in what it will then help with downstream?
Yeah, I still believe that a lot of the effect of zone 2, and let's go deep into the muscle, right? Like the effect on the mitochondria will be, let's say, muscle group related. You won't have adaptations in your lats if you do only bike work, right? You will have
Yeah.
cardiovascular adaptations related to your heart will pump out more blood, and that's a very large effect. So that's why you also see a lot of runners doing a lot of zone 2 on the bike, by the way, because of the effects on the heart. But if you also want to look at the effects, let's say on the local, the peripheral effects in the muscle, then I do think that it's a good idea to try to be specific to the modality that you want, which is in CrossFit for sure. Lower body is very important, also upper body, lower body. But let's say you're looking at high rocks, then it's maybe more interesting even. Yeah. So again, we don't know that much, right? Like what I would say is that zone 2 can also be done where you have a combination of ergs and functional movements. And then
Yeah.
you really have, as a programmer, you have to think about it really carefully to again go very cyclical, very light, even for guys like Jason Hopper using 10 15 kilograms of dumbbells. It's fine, because what we know that once you are doing something that is even moderately heavy with a moderate barbell, 50 60 kilogram barbell, the instant power is so high that you're way above all the zones that are related to your zone 2 threshold. Because a lot of people, I think, mistakenly use too much, let's say, heart rate for monitoring zone 2, pure heart rate, because it could be like, if I do, let's say, right, extreme example, if I do 2 power cleans at 100 kilo per minute for 20 minutes, I think my heart rate will be 140, 150, but I'm not in
Yeah.
zone 2, right? Because it's just enormous amount of instant power for 2 3 seconds per, let's say 5 seconds per minute. Yeah,
Yes.
your oxygen deficit is accumulating, so your heart rate goes up, but it's not zone 2. So if you want to do, for example, a zone 2 workout, you accumulate 200 kilocals on the air bike or on the bike, and every 2 minutes you hop off the bike and you do a couple burpees and some dumbbell hang clean and jerks, like not many, and then you jump up again and you try to keep cycling through the erg. So that would be, for a CrossFitter, I think, a very good zone 2 session, because you kind of combine not only doing the zone like on the erg, but also having some movement, which is still the end goal of CrossFit, right? Like most people want to get better at benchmark workouts and open workouts, and not specifically at the erg, I would say. Yeah,
So
that's something
the contractions are necessary, is what we're
yeah,
saying.
yeah, yeah. The load of each contraction, that's how I look at it. All right, so we know that if a cyclist does zone 2 work, his heart rate is whatever, 140, but the power he's producing, that's what, in my opinion, is the most important. So the amount of force and load he's putting out per contraction is actually pretty low, compared to a CrossFitter. That's already a lot harder, right? Like anything you do functionally, even burpees, is going to be pretty high in
Higher
in, in
output. Yeah.
in in contraction, yeah, and hence power. That's what we now saw with the WOD motion sensor, for sure, is that the power production, even of, man, you can push 500 watts for 2 minutes when you just do 17, 18 burpees per minute. If you just do burpees,
Wow.
only that, at a high
Wow.
pace, you're pushing insane amount of power, right? That's why
That's
burpees are so
crazy.
hard, right? So if
Yeah.
you want to do this zone 2, you don't do 17 burpees per minute. You do slow burpees, 8, 9 per minute for most people, and that would equate to 180 to 220 watts, and that's what we want to have with the aerobic conditioning. So yeah, it's kind of a mind shift, but yeah, if you want to get let's say, really dial in your training, I think you should mix up the intensities a lot.
Because then I think of it from like the polar opposite perspective, and say if someone is super untrained and unfit, walk off the street, and you put them in a sauna, right, and their
Yeah,
heart rate goes into the range
yeah, yep.
which would be typically considered zone 2, does that then mean it is zone 2
No, I don't think so.
training?
You need
No,
contractions.
you need the contractions. Yeah.
That's a little bit of, if there's one thing people can take away from this podcast, is that the heart rate is yeah, deceiving in functional sports, to be honest. Like, really, it's deceiving. And yeah, it's a good measurement if you do it on the erg, for sure. Like, it's a great way. And even when you do the workout I just described, when you keep it low. But yeah, it depends on caffeine intake, hydration status, which type of movements you do, for sure. Even it's known that if you, for example, go from a prone position to a standing position, your blood pressure obviously changes, and that also has an effect. It's called the baroreflex on heart rate. All right. So that is something you don't have with cycling or running. You always keep in the same position. But with functional movements, for sure, handstand push-ups, all that stuff, it has a large effect on just, yeah, like the physiology of the heart rate, call it like that. And yeah, so that's why heart rate can be all over the place. And yeah, maybe it's not the best way of looking at it, in my opinion.
Because it after all, it's a proxy, isn't it? It's not
It's a
actually
proxy.
what.
Yeah,
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 it's not what you're after. It's just the easiest way for most people to
yes.
measure it. Like, we don't
I mean,
even
it's
have
it's
blood lactate measuring. And
yes. I mean, it's a great proxy for endurance sports because it's linearly related to power, right? And
okay.
aerobic power output. So we know that oxygen uptake and heart rate literally go like 100%, whatever, 98% are correlated. All right. So then obviously if you're a cyclist, you look at your heart rate and it's normal temperature, it's not 40 degrees, it's probably a very good proxy. But again, in CrossFit, it's a little bit more complicated like usual. And it can be that because of the specific movements you're doing, your heart rate is higher or lower. And what are you looking at then, in my opinion? And also, are you going to watch your watch when you're doing whatever burpees and pull-ups? I don't think so.
Yeah, it is super interesting because it's been huge in the sport for the last couple of years, and especially now with a lot of people crossing over and dabbling between high rocks and CrossFit. I think it's coming up more and more.
Yeah, yeah. For high rocks, obviously, it's I would say it's more useful. Certainly when you do running workouts, even when you do erg workouts for high rockers, they also need to do way more. Let's say conditioning, hitting those thresholds, maybe VO2 max levels, and so on. For high rocks, I would say it makes, in my opinion, way more sense to get guided by a heart rate monitor if it can, yeah, let's say guide you in the right intensity. That's great, right? Like for sure it's great because also don't have to go super hard all the time in high rocks, certainly not.
Yeah, of course. And the time domain is obviously a lot longer.
Yeah, 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 exactly.
And do you think, with the stuff that you've studied, that with CrossFit being so new compared to something like cycling or even weightlifting, for example, where we know genetically what the perfect specimen looks like for their particular sport, I feel like with CrossFit, for the longest time, we've had a lot of different people of a lot of different makeups, physiological makeups, I mean, and
Yeah.
genetic makeups, that have been able to do it at the highest level. But as time has gone on, I feel like that has almost been narrowed down to, you need to be of a certain constitution to make it at the highest level, as opposed to prior being, if you were willing to do the work, you had a chance of making it. Whereas now you can do the work and you probably still won't make it if you're of a certain constitution.
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the studies we have done related to CrossFit specifically, and that was in the lab, I think is quite interesting. We profiled top end CrossFit athletes, so specifically CrossFit. So what we mean is we put them into the lab, we measured their VO2 max, but we also measured strength parameters typically measured in the lab. And what we found is, and then we tried to correlate this to performance parameters, which in our case was the open, like how high you ranked in the open. And of all the parameters, like 50 parameters or whatever we measured, there was only, yeah, one specific cluster of parameters that correlate to open performance, and that was anthropometrics, how long your femurs were and how long, sorry, your femurs were, and your upper arm was, and also your statue was somehow correlated. So this means that if you look at open workouts that are typically done in the gym, vertical movements in the sagittal plane, right? Pull-ups, thrusters, all that stuff. It for our cohort of well-trained and even games athletes, we had a couple games athletes. Yeah, the specific anthropometrics were very important, more so than VO2 max. VO2 max was not at all correlated, which was interesting in my opinion. And even strength, yeah, they all had high strength, so it was difficult to have a big effect there. Obviously, when we would have had Other types of athletes, maybe lower caliber athletes, I do think some strength as well as VO2 max parameters would correlate somewhat. But if you have a good cohort of people, exactly as you described, it's mostly anthropometrics. But then, I mean, you know better than me, Hopper as well as James Sprague, they're all are tall athletes, so they kind of put away my theory. But that is because I think the programming really has changed in the games, in the even semifinals or in-person competitions. Specific statue is less of a disadvantage, maybe even an advantage in certain workouts. And that's also why you see these guys with a lot of power. They have a lot of muscle mass. They're very tall, big, powerful athletes. They have a large advantage related to other athletes who maybe are a bit smaller and maybe are better in thrusters, but it's not only thrusters nowadays. So it's a very interesting discussion. But I do think certainly relate to open workouts, let's say qualifiers for certain, competitions. There, I do think that, statue and just how you're built is important in specifically CrossFit. I'm talking about CrossFit here. Yeah,
Does
that's
that
what we see.
correlate to does that correlate to the power? So anthropometrically, if someone is of higher stature and they're going up against someone of shorter stature, is the person of shorter stature putting out less power because of those
Absolutely.
levers than the taller person?
This is the beauty of this WOD motion sensor now. Exactly, yes. So what we found is we did tests in athletes, in elite athletes, and we saw that, for example, if you do some kind of a ramp test, so an increasing intensity and test with functional movements, thrusters, burpees, and so on, we see that certain athletes get less far in the test, but put out more power because they're taller. See what I mean?
Okay. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
let's say, right, you have Jason Hopper and you let him do burpee, let's say a dead by thruster workout, right? Just that easy. Like start with one thruster,
Simple.
two,
Yeah.
three, four, until he fails. And you measure power. And then you let someone as Justin Medeiros do that, who's a obviously very great, moves super well. Um, Whatever, right? Let's say Justin gets 1 or 2 rounds further than Jason. It could well be, and I'm quite sure, that Hopper is putting out more power
Over the total piece.
certainly over everything, over every rep. So his body has to produce more load over a certain time frame, which is in this case a minute or whatever. And he doesn't get as far, so his performance in CrossFit measurements is less good, right? But his power is higher. So
Yeah.
it's a little bit the
Crazy.
same as you have Tadej Pogacar, who is the best cyclist, as I said, in the world. He puts out 7 watts per kilo for 30 minutes, then which is whatever 400 watts, let's say, right? Like 400
It's
watts.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. And then you have another athlete like Wout van Aert, who's a Belgian, one of my favorite cyclists in the world. He also puts out 400 watts for 30 minutes, the same absolute watts, but he's 11 kilograms heavier, so he will be way down the line
Way slower.
and lose
Way
three,
slower.
4 minutes. It's almost the same. It's almost the same as what I just explained with the CrossFitters. So that's very interesting in my opinion, because that's why you also see differences within competitions between athletes, right? Like, why is an athlete not winning every event? Like, if
Yeah.
you have
Exactly
Tadej
right.
Pogacar, he wins every race basically, right? Like, he's the best, so he wins. But in CrossFit for sure, and that's why the sport is so exciting, in my opinion. You don't see this. You see Colton Mertens winning an event, and then the next event he's dead lost.
Yes.
And that is
100%.
because exactly what I said: movement efficiency, biomechanics, and the variety of movements.
And on the movement efficiency, have you done tests where you compare someone or people of similar levels and one moves
Yep,
more or less efficiently than the other and the
yep,
impact that that has on fatigue and power?
yep. So what we measure again is highly interesting. So we measured. It's even in a video. Again, maybe we can push it, put it in the show
Yeah,
notes. So what we did
sure.
is we measured Justin Medeiros with this movement sensor, and then we also measured. I forgot his name now. yeah, sorry. Also another semi-final athlete, so really high caliber athlete, but not as the same level as Justin. And they have the same statue. They looked very much the same, in my opinion. 1 meter 70. I don't know how much feet that is,
Yeah,
but
around
one
that.
around, so very similar, not exactly, but very similar. And then we let them do thrusters. What we did, we calculated. So we calculated what would be the power. It's basic physics. It's kind of like level 1 physics of the CrossFit level 1. If the athlete would move the barbell, let's say doing thrusters, exactly in the sagittal plane, so exactly up and down, like fully up and down, right? That's ideal power, right?
Yep.
And then we compare it to what we actually measure with the sensor, which is a little bit of movement back and forth. Yeah, maybe some with the setup, some wrong things, whatever. And then we saw that certainly at middle intensities, so close to his threshold power, Justin was almost 100% efficient, which is insane. Meaning that he
That's
was
crazy.
moving the barbell like almost exactly in the sagittal plane, and he was losing almost zero energy to our calculations, all right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Like literally zero. And then the other person was also at this threshold, pushing pushing around 20% more watts for the same amount of thrusters. Same person. When you look at with the eye as a coach, you don't see it. They were both good at thrusters, obviously, right? You don't see this, but we measured this very clearly. And this means, and that's the interesting part, that if you would measure like with lactate, when you put a lactate curve over this, for instance, threshold power is whatever, 360 watts, whatever, right? Using functional movements. And the other person is also 360 watts, the other athlete, but because it's a lot less efficient, he's going to do less reps at those 360 watts. And
Yeah,
that's
of
why
course.
he will lose likely a workout with thrusters and burpees. It's physiology, it's biomechanics, it's almost exact science, in my opinion. So
Yeah, but it's
he can
crazy
improve his
because
Yeah, go ahead.
like you said, that wasn't even a subjective difference visually. So
No,
looking
you
at
don't see
them
this.
side by side. So imagine a more egregious example where someone is moving visually a lot poorer, how much more of a difference that would make as
It's
well.
insane. It's insane. Crazy difference. It's like also even like we measured 25.1 open workout. I did the workout. As I said, I'm not the best like long workouts. Now I understand it's also because I have long levers, relatively long levers, compared to another person who was typical CrossFit athlete, kind of the same, let's say, level as me. He was a lot shorter than me, and he pushed less watts over these 15 minutes. I think 280 watts for 15 minutes he pushed. I pushed 310 watts, and he was 20 reps faster or more than me in that workout. All right. So yeah, it's highly interesting. So who's the fittest? You tell me. Who's the fittest? He's probably the
Yeah,
fittest because in CrossFit terms, he's fitter. But I produce more power.
but I think it puts some sense into a lot of the things that we've seen. So it explains a lot of what we've seen in the sport over the years in regards to actually tangibly having data that you can say this is the reason or the likely reason why this person beat this person or there was this
Exactly.
much of a time gap,
Exactly. Exactly.
which
I cannot say
previously
more.
I don't
Yeah.
think, yeah, previously I don't think was the case. I think there was a lot of unknowns there.
Yeah. Yeah. It becomes less no. Yeah, less unknown. Still some unknowns, but yes, for sure, less unknowns, and that's why you see what it was 25.3, the workout where you had all the big boys doing that workout where they need to be a lot of power and actually being a lot of ergs, I remember, right?
Yeah, yeah, the rower,
And
yeah.
you have like these enormous times of Jason Hopper and James Sprague. um, that's because yeah, they could use their stature, they could use their length to produce a lot of power on the erg specifically, and even on the snatches, I think it was, and the clean and jerks, and that's why they were the best in the world, and even in the open announcement, right, which usually doesn't happen. So yeah,
Do you find that there's so the people that are of higher power, have they actually physiologically got the ability to throttle down the amount of power they use, or is it a case where sort of a contraction is a contraction. So that might sound like a bit of an ambiguous question, but two people doing a 60 kilo power clean, for example, one of them has a 1 RM of 200 kilos, but one has a 1 RM of 80. Is there a way that the person, does the science show that the person with the higher 1 RM can throttle that back so they are using less power to achieve the same thing? Does that make
I
sense?
kind of understand what you mean. I would say, like, let's say movement efficiency is equal, that it's equal, and they have the same statue. The amount of work you need to move that barbell up is going to be the same. It's physics, right? It's only going to be, obviously, certainly under fatigue, that the guy who has the 200, or the girl who has a 200 kilo power clean, will be less fatigued, use less type 2 muscle fibers, and will be moving more efficiently, most likely, as well. So there's less inefficient movement, and that's why in a workout, for sure, the person with the highest 1 RM will win, likely. All right. It's not always the case. For example, in my case, I have a high 1 RM, but I'm not fatigue resistant because I have a lot of type 2 muscle fibers. So I can do whatever, 3 reps at 90%, and then I go down really quickly. While other people with the same absolute load, which is the case in CrossFit, right? It's all about absolute loads. They have lower 1 RM, but because they're more type 1 muscle fibers, more endurant, they can destroy me at any workout. So it is power, but also physiology, in my opinion, because you need also to produce that work over time. Like, work is the amount of first time distance, and then you have a power that is also dividing that over a time unit. So that's, I think CrossFit is a lot just physics and biomechanics, to be honest, and then you sprinkle in some physiology and some cardiovascular capacity, and you start to understand the sport a bit better. But we're
Okay,
still
yeah.
at the cusp. I think we don't know everything for sure.
And so, like, you've been doing this for a year now. You're over 100 videos in. What has been the biggest surprise from studies that you've done for you?
Yeah, that's obviously not so easy. So yeah, so WOD Science per se, we have done way longer, right? So I've been doing, like, thinking about this for way longer. Also doing the studies, these are all way longer. YouTube is just a way of expressing this. Um,
Okay, yeah.
um, so that's one. Also doing the sport way longer, having also the exercise background. So I think what surprises me, is kind of what we talked about, to be honest. That we know now, with the data, that functional movements, even when they are considered scaling and very easy, are very powerful by nature, right? So it is a different beast than ergs. Yeah, as I said, like, if you do a couple burpees as a warm up, you're instantly producing 250, 300 watts. And that's why people are getting sweaty and tired and even already breathing quite hard by just doing a couple burpees. All right. And what I also maybe relate to that is, I always thought that elite athletes are kind of generalists, and they are just very good at skill. They are very strong. But if you look at their actual power output, they're way below athletes like cyclists, for example, or skiers, or something like that. Right? If you take a 10-minute workout or a 2K row or something like that, I thought, yeah, CrossFitters, they just have to be good at everything, so they're kind of less good in certainly power. But what we know now is that although their aerobic power, VO2 max, the amount of oxygen they can take up and actually produce that oxidative energy, is certainly not as high as a Tadej Pogacar, certainly not. But they have an enormous capacity to use their glycolytic system, so their anaerobic and also the PCR system. And that is something that is very difficult to study, because we cannot just measure the anaerobic part of a movement. But what we know is that if you have an elite athlete who's doing a cyclical 15-minute AMRAP, right? Like 25.1, people can look up that workout. It's a very cyclical, easy workout. Let's say light workout, not easy, light workout.
Yeah.
They're producing 500 watts approximately according to our calculations, right? Give or take, it depends on how you measure it, but let's say 500 watts. In the same athlete, their threshold power, so at their where their lactate is really start to spike, is 360 watts. That's a massive difference, right? In
Yeah, it
an
is.
endurance athlete, that would be way closer, all right? Because they can produce most of the energy aerobically. But this extra, what is this, 140 watts that you produce for a long time, which is 15 minutes, that's long, has to come from somewhere. It has to come from the glycolytic system, the recycling of PCR and so on. And that is something that really surprised me and find super interesting, because if you are pushing 500 watts on an ERC for 15 minutes as a it's not directly comparable, but still as an athlete, as an endurance athlete, you are high
A
elite.
god.
All right.
Yeah, you're a god.
Um,
Yeah.
so it's kind of compensated with the fact that these people have an enormous ability to produce energy anaerobic, and I think it's fascinating, and that's something that most exercise sciences like don't really know and don't think about. But I think it's useful and logical as well, because they're constantly doing those functional movements. We know they're very glycolytic in nature, so that the body adapts to this. The body adapts to the stimulus. That's for sure. So that's why they're so good at that. Yeah, that's why um, if you want to improve your aerobic system, as we talked about earlier, as let's say an average athlete like me, and you're just an RX athlete, and you want to get to the next level, and you want to improve your aerobic system, like you want to produce more energy with oxygen. Don't always do 15-minute AMRAPs for time, because you will just push the glycolytic system all the time. Maybe you should do some zone 2, some running, some lower intensity work to also get that base up, using functional movements, but very, very light and maybe low amount per minute. That's maybe the most interesting thing that I learned the last 6 months, let's say.
Beautiful. Awesome. Well, I think that's we've covered some really good topics today, and I think that's a good little chestnut to finish on. We really, really appreciate you taking the time to come on and have a chat and give us some insight into the studies you've done and your background. And hopefully
Thanks
we
for
can
having
have you
me.
back on again one day.
Yes, for sure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
Bye.